The neon sign above the velvet note flickered, casting a sickly green glow on the rain-slicked street. Inside, it wasn't much better. A thin haze of cigarette smoke still clung to the low ceiling, even in the age of non-smoking bans, and the air hummed with the stale scent of spilled beer and forgotten dreams. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of night where only the truly dedicated or the truly desperate ventured out. An older man, his hair still thick but now a distinguished silver, sat alone at a small wobbly table near the back. He wore a simple dark jacket and jeans, a baseball cap pulled low, and a pair of dark glasses that, even indoors, seemed less like a fashion statement and more like a shield. He nursed a glass of iced tea, his gaze fixed on the small stage bathed in a single slightly burnt-out spotlight on that stage. A band of impersonators was tuning up. Not just any impersonators, but Elvis Presley impersonators, a whole band of them. The lead singer, a stocky man in a rhinestone-studded white jumpsuit that looked a size too small, adjusted his microphone with a flourish. His sideburns were glued on a bit crooked, and his pompadour defied gravity with an almost comical stiffness. He grinned at the sparse crowd, a wide practice grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. All right, thank you very kindly." The lead singer boomed, his voice a gravelly imitation of a famous drawl. "Are you ready to rock?" And a few whoops answered him. The man at the back table almost imperceptibly winced. Memphis, he thought, always Memphis, the city where it all began, and, in a way, where it all ended. The band launched into Blue Suede Shoes. The guitarist, a gangly kid with a surprisingly good ear, strummed a powerful opening chord. The bassist, a woman with a no-nonsense expression, laid down a solid rhythm. The drummer, barely out of his teens, attacked his kit with an enthusiasm that bordered on violence. And then Marty, the lead singer, began to sing. His voice was a valiant effort. He hit most of the notes, sometimes with a little strain, and he certainly had the moves down, the hip swivel, the lip curl, the dramatic knee bend. He even threw in a few karate chops for good measure, narrowly avoiding knocking over the microphone stand. The man at the back watched a strange cocktail of emotions brewing inside him. Amusement, certainly. He'd seen countless impersonators. Over the years, some good, many terrible. These guys were somewhere in the middle. They weren't slick professionals with Vegas budgets. They were local, earnest, and a little rough around the edges. But beneath the amusement, a deeper feeling stirred. Nostalgia, sharp and poignant. He remembered the first time he'd sung that song, the raw energy, the way the crowd had roared. He remembered the sweat, the adrenaline, the absolute joy of it. This band, in their earnest, slightly off-key way, was trying to capture a piece of that. They were trying to keep something alive. He noticed details others wouldn't. The way Marty held a microphone just a fraction too high, the slight hesitation before a particularly famous vocal flourish, the way the guitarist Ben mirrored Scotty Moore's iconic stance, even though he probably didn't realize it was Scotty. The bassist Leo had a quiet intensity that reminded him of Bill Black, and the drummer Sam was just pure, unadulterated energy, like a young DJ Fontana. They were good in their own way. They were trying to be him. Not really, they were trying to honor him. And that, he realized, made all the difference. As Marty finished the first verse, he did a dramatic knee slide, his rhinestone jumpsuit stretching precariously. He landed with a grunt, but immediately popped back up, grinning triumphantly. The man in the back found himself almost smiling. Almost. He'd been away from it all for a long time. Decades, in fact. He'd craved anonymity, peace, a life free from the relentless glare of the spotlight, and he'd found it for the most part. He lived simply, quietly, far from the crowds and the clamor. He rarely listened to his own music, didn't watch old films, didn't seek out reminders of the life he'd left behind. It was too painful, too overwhelming. Tonight, sitting in this dingy club, watching these four people pour their hearts into his songs, something shifted. It wasn't painful, not entirely. It was resonant, like a chord struck deep inside him that had long been silent. They moved on to Hound Dog. Marty really got into it, shaking his hips with gusto, his voice cracking slightly on the high notes, but his enthusiasm never wavering. The crowd, small as it was, cheered them on. A few couples were even dancing, awkwardly but joyfully near the stage. The man watched the faces in the crowd. Too, they weren't tourists or superfans. They were just regular people, enjoying a Tuesday night transported for a few minutes by the familiar melodies. They weren't judging the impersonator's authenticity. They were just enjoying the music. His music. He felt a pang not of regret, but of something akin to wistfulness. He'd given so much, sacrificed so much for that connection with an audience. And then he walked away from it. Was it the right choice? He'd always believed it was, for his sanity, for his peace. But watching Marty hit a surprisingly strong note, even if it was followed by a slightly strained one, he wondered, had he lost something too in his pursuit of quiet? Had he lost the pure, unadulterated joy of making music, of sharing it with others, regardless of the fame or the pressure? The thought hung in the smoky air, heavy and unspoken. He took another sip of his iced tea, the condensation chilling his fingers. The band played on their music, filling the small club, a vibrant echo of a bygone era. And in the back, the silent observer watched. His heart stirred in ways he hadn't expected and hadn't felt in a very, very long time. The night was just beginning, and he had a feeling it wasn't going to be a quiet one after all. The band, the Memphis Cats, as their hastily scrawled banner proclaimed, finished their first set with a booming rendition of Jailhouse Rock. Marty, breathless and glistening with sweat, took a deep bow, his pompadour wobbling precariously. The rest of the band, Ben on guitar, Leo on bass, and Sam on drums, grinned, clearly pleased with their performance despite the meager applause. The older man in the back, still cloaked in shadows and the baseball cap, found himself tapping his foot under the table. The rhythm, the energy. It was all so familiar, so ingrained in his very being. He watched Marty take a swig from a water bottle, then pat his chest, trying to catch his breath. "All right, folks, we're gonna take a short break," Marty announced, his voice raspy. "Then we'll be back to shake, rattle, and roll this place right off its foundation." A few polite claps and scattered cheers followed. The small crowd dispersed, some heading for the bar, others stepping outside for a smoke. The band members put down their instruments. Sam, the drummer, hopped off his stool and stretched his young face bright with enthusiasm. Ben, the guitarist, carefully laid his guitar in its stand, running a cloth over the fretboard. Leo, the bassist, just leaned against her amp, a thoughtful look on her face. The man in the back continued to observe. He noticed the camaraderie among them, the easy smiles, the shared passion. It wasn't about money for them, he could tell. It was about the music, about keeping the flame alive. And that, he realized, was something truly special. He remembered those early days before the fame became a cage, when it was just him and Scotty and Bill and DJ in small clubs, playing their hearts out, feeling the pure, unadulterated joy of creation. That was what he saw in these young musicians. That same spark, that same dedication. His gaze drifted back to Marty, who's now mopping his brow with a towel, his rhinestone jumpsuit. Looking even more strained, Marty caught his eye for a split second, and the man quickly looked away, adjusting his cap. He wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. He just wanted to watch, to feel. Suddenly, a melody drifted from the stage. Ben had picked up his guitar again, not to tune, but to noodle around with a familiar tune. It was the opening to Can't Help Falling in Love, soft, tender, instantly recognizable. The man in the back felt a jolt. That song, quiet moments, the emotional power, the way it could silence a roaring crowd and bring tears to people's eyes. It was a song he poured his soul into, a song that meant so much to so many. Ben played a few bars, slowly, carefully, as if trying to remember the exact phrasing. Marty, who had been talking to Sam, stopped and listened. Leo closed her eyes, swaying slightly to the gentle rhythm. The man at the back found himself humming along a low, almost inaudible sound that vibrated deep in his chest. He felt a deep warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something more profound. It was a connection to a part of himself he had thought long buried. He remembered recording that song, the delicate balance of emotion and restraint. He remembered the feeling of delivering it live, watching the faces in the audience, seeing the love reflected in their eyes. It was a unique bond, a sacred trust between performer and listener. Ben stumbled on a chord, a minor flub. He frowned, trying it again. "Nah, that's not quite it," he muttered to himself. Marty stepped closer to Ben. "What's up, man? It's so delicate, you know. Every note matters, and the feeling, it's hard to capture that vulnerability." "Yeah, it is," Marty agreed, running a hand through his slightly deflated pompadour. "It's not just the notes, it's the heart. That's why he was the king, right?" Leo chimed in. "It's the hardest one in the set to do right. It just feels exposed." Sam nodded. "Yeah, you can't fake that one. It's got to be real." The man at the back listened to their conversation, a lump forming in his throat. They understood. They truly understood. It wasn't just about mimicry for them, it was about the essence of the music, the emotion behind it. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the simple, heartfelt notes of Ben's practice wash over him. He felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic force drawing him towards the stage. It wasn't the need for applause or the hunger for fame. It was a deeper, more elemental urge, the urge to create, to share, to connect, through music. The song had always been a bridge, connecting him to the hearts of millions. Now it felt like it was connecting him to these four earnest musicians and to the part of himself he had locked away. He opened his eyes. The room felt different now. The smoky haze seemed to shimmer with possibility. The wobbly table, the sticky floor, the flickering neon sign, they all faded into the background. All that mattered was the stage, the instruments, and the quiet yearning for perfection. From these young, dedicated artists, he took another sip of his iced tea, but his mind was no longer on the mundane. It was on the music, on the song, on the subtle, undeniable truth that lay within every note. The quiet observer was no longer just an observer. Something was stirring, something that had been dormant for too long, and it was about to awaken. The break was drawing to a close. Marty, having refreshed himself, was back in front of the microphone, doing a few stretches. Ben was tuning his guitar with meticulous care, occasionally plucking a chord from Love Me Tender. Leo was chatting quietly with Sam, both looking a little tired but still buzzing from the first set. The man in the back had made a decision. He wouldn't just sit there, he couldn't, not anymore. The music had seeped into his bones, reawakening something vital. He slowly pushed back his chair, the scraping sound barely audible over the low murmur of the regathering crowd. He stood tall and straight, then took off his baseball cap, revealing a silver-streaked pompadour that, though faded, still held a familiar majesty. He kept his dark glasses on. He began to walk not towards the exit but towards the stage. His steps were measured, deliberate. Each step felt like a bridge across, years across a lifetime of choices. He wasn't sure what he was going to do. Only that he had to be closer to the source of that feeling, that undeniable pull. He reached the edge of the small space in front of the stage, near where the cables snaked across the floor. He leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the band. He was no longer hidden in the shadows. He was there on the fringe, bathed in the faint spill of the stage lights. Marty was about to announce the next song. He glanced out at the audience, his eyes scanning the faces. His gaze flickered over the man at the pillar, pausing for a fraction of a second. Marty didn't recognize him, of course. Just another older fan, perhaps. But there was something in the man's stance, a quiet intensity, that made Marty do a double take. He shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue. "All right, folks, welcome back," Marty called out, his voice already strained from the first set. He cleared his throat. "We're going to kick off this next set with a little something from the '68 comeback special, if you know what I mean." He winked, striking a pose. "Get ready for trouble." Ben, Leo, and Sam immediately launched into the gritty opening riff. The song was a powerful bluesy number full of raw energy. Marty leaned into the microphone, trying to channel that aggressive, swaggering delivery. He moved across the small stage, his hips swiveling, his lip curling. He poured every ounce of his dedication into it. The man at the pillar watched, his lips moving almost imperceptibly, mouthing the words along with Marty. He remembered that 68 special, the electricity in the air, the feeling of reclaiming his voice, his music. After years of Hollywood musicals, he remembered the leather, the sweat, the sheer defiance of it all. Marty hit a particularly challenging high note, his voice cracking slightly. He recovered quickly, pushing through, but the strain was visible. He winced, then plowed on, his determination unwavering. The men at the pillar felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to help. Not to take over, not to upstage, but just to offer a whisper of support, a subtle correction. He knew that note. He'd sung it thousands of times. He knew exactly how to hit it, how to phrase it, how to make it sound effortless, even when it demanded everything. He took a step closer to the stage, leaning in slightly. As Marty sang the next line, "I'm a man of constant sorrow," the man at the pillar hummed the note, just loud enough for himself, but with a clarity and resonance that seemed to vibrate in the air. Marty focused on his performance. Didn't hear it, but Ben, the guitarist, was closer. He was concentrating on his chords, but a faint, pure tone seemed to cut through the club's ambient noise. He glanced towards the side of the stage, curious. He saw the older man standing there, head slightly tilted, as if listening intently. Ben shrugged, thinking it was just the acoustics playing tricks on him. The song continued, full of fire and passion. Marty was giving it his all, leaving nothing on the stage. The man at the pillar felt a surge of admiration for him. He was a true performer, even in a small club. On a Tuesday night, he genuinely loved the music. As trouble ended with a final dramatic flourish, Marty posed, chest heaving. Leo wiped her brow. Sam was already bouncing, ready for the next song. Marty leaned into the microphone again. "All right, next up, we're gonna slow it down just a touch. We want to see if you folks have some suspicious minds." The opening chords of the iconic song began. The man at the pillar felt a rush of something powerful. This song, this was the one that always got to him. The blend of heartbreak and hope, the soaring chorus, the dramatic build-up. Marty began to sing, his voice a little more confident now that he was warmed up. He moved with familiar swaying rhythm, his eyes scanning the crowd. As he approached the first chorus, "We can't go on together with suspicious minds," his voice began to strain on the higher notes. Just as it had earlier, the man at the pillar felt a sudden, overwhelming impulse. He knew what to do. He knew how to guide that note, how to make it soar without breaking. Without thinking, he took another step, putting him almost on the edge of the stage. It wasn't Marty. It was deeper, richer, cleaner. He quickly glanced over. The older man was there, standing barely a foot from the stage, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses, a strange, almost ethereal hum emanating from him. Ben shot a quick, bewildered look at Leo, who was equally engrossed in her best line. He tried to dismiss it, but the sound was so clear, so perfect. It was like a ghost note, an invisible presence making the song even more powerful. The man at the pillar didn't stop. He was lost in the music, now guided by instinct. He was just part of the song, part of the energy. He felt the familiar thrill of it, the connection. He was on the edge, standing between two worlds, and for a fleeting moment he felt utterly, completely alive. The stage was calling, and he was closer than he'd been in decades. The set continued. Suspicious minds, transitioning into a fiery, burning love. Marty was now fully in his element, fueled by the energy of the crowd, small as it was, and the surprisingly tight playing of his band. He was sweating, a bead of perspiration trickling down his sideburns, but his spirit was high. He truly loved performing. The man at the pillar remained a silent, attentive presence. He still hummed along occasionally, his voice a subtle undercurrent that only Ben, the observant guitarist, seemed to catch. Ben kept stealing glances at the older man, a growing sense of curiosity and unease swirling within him. There was something about the way he stood, the way he moved to the music, even the way his mouth shaped the words silently. It was too familiar, too precise. As the band launched into In the Ghetto, the mood in the club shifted. The song was a poignant, heartfelt ballad, a stark contrast to the rock and roll energy that preceded it. Marty's voice softened, attempting to capture the vulnerability and despair of the lyrics. He struggled with some of the lower, more emotional notes, his voice occasionally wavering. The man at the pillar felt a pang in his heart. This song, too, held a deep significance for him. It was a cry for understanding, a plea for change. He remembered the courage it took to record it, to put out something so different from his usual fare. As Marty sang, and his mama cries, "'Cause if there's one thing that she don't need, it's another hungry mouth to feed in the ghetto." His voice cracked noticeably. He paused, trying to regain his composure. Visibly frustrated with himself, the band members glanced at each other, concerned. Marty usually nailed this one, driven by pure emotion. Tonight he was off. Without thinking, the man at the pillar took another step forward, placing his hand gently on the edge of the stage. He looked directly at Marty, his dark glasses still hiding his eyes, but his posture conveyed a quiet reassurance. Then, very softly, he hummed the next line. "People, don't you understand?" The note, clear, pure, and perfectly pitched. Marty looked up, startled. He heard the hum, the correct note, and for a split second his eyes met the man's. There was an unspoken connection, a shared understanding of the music. Marty, a seasoned performer despite his club gigs, felt a strange chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a fan humming along. This was someone who knew the song intimately. Quickly recovered, taking a deep breath, and continued his voice, a little stronger now, guided by that unexpected subtle cue. The rest of the band, particularly Ben and Leo, noticed the exchange. Leo frowned, wondering who the silent helper was. Ben's eyes widened behind his bangs. The song finished, bathed in a respectful, if subdued, round of applause. Marty bowed, then turned to his bandmates. A thoughtful expression on his face. He glanced back at the man at the pillar, who was still standing there, unmoving. During the momentary lull before the next song, Marty cleared his throat. "All right, folks, thank you for that," he said, gesturing vaguely. He then turned directly to the man at the pillar. "Hey there, buddy," Marty called out, his voice slightly hoarse. "You really seem to know your Elvis, huh?" He forced a smile. The man nodded slightly, his expression unreadable behind the dark glasses. "You got a good ear, I'll give you that," Marty continued, a hint of genuine curiosity in his tone. "I swear, I heard you back there helping me out on a couple of those notes. You ever sing before?" He chuckled, a good-natured tease. The man hesitated for a moment. Then, in a voice that was surprisingly deep and melodic, though a little gravelly from disuse, he said, "A long time ago, son. A long, long time ago." The simplicity of the answer and the quiet dignity with which it was delivered struck Marty. It wasn't a boast, just a statement of fact. "Well, you still got it, whatever it is," Marty said, genuinely impressed. "You know, we're about to play Heartbreak Hotel, and I gotta tell you, after that last one, my voice is feeling a little worn out." He gave a wry smile. "It's a tough one, that. Heartbreak Hotel." He paused. Then an idea, wild and impulsive, sparked in his eyes. It was a joke, half serious, born of a performer's instinct to connect with the audience, and perhaps a genuine moment of fatigue. "Tell you what," Marty said, leaning into the microphone, his voice carrying through the small club, "since you're such a connoisseur of the King's music, and you seem to know all the notes, why don't you come up here and give us a hand on Heartbreak Hotel?" He gestured expansively towards the stage, a playful grin on his face. "Just for a verse or two, for old time's sake. What do you say, partner? Show these folks what a real fan sounds like." The suggestion hung in the air, light and unexpected. Ben, Leo, and Sam stared at Marty, then at the man at the pillar. Their expressions a mix of surprise and confusion. Was Marty serious? The man at the pillar stood motionless. He could feel the eyes of the band and the few curious onlookers on him. His heart began to pound a rhythm he hadn't felt in decades. The microphone, the stage, the sudden, spontaneous invitation. It was all a rush of forgotten sensations. He could refuse. Could simply shake his head, put his cap back on, and disappear into the night. No one would think anything of it. It was just a joke, an offhand remark. But then he looked at Marty, who, despite his playful tone, had a genuine curiosity in his eyes. He looked at Ben, Leo, and Sam, their instruments poised, waiting. He felt the pull of the music, the silent yearning of the crowd for a moment of magic. And he remembered the feeling from earlier, the joy, the connection, the sense of being truly alive. A faint smile touched his lips, hidden behind the dark glasses. He took a deep breath, a breath that felt like it had been held for a lifetime. He adjusted his stance. "Well," he said, his voice a little clearer now, carrying just enough to be heard over the low buzz of the club. "I suppose I could try to help you out, son." Pushed off the pillar, and with a quiet dignity began to walk towards the steps. The band members exchanged wide-eyed glances. The small crowd watched, intrigued. The unexpected request had been answered. And something truly extraordinary was about to unfold. A hush fell over the velvet note as the older man began his ascent. It wasn't a dramatic spotlight-stealing climb, but a slow, deliberate walk, each step a testament to years of quiet living and perhaps quiet longing. He reached the 2 low steps and ascended them with an almost regal grace, never breaking his calm demeanor. Marty, the late impersonator, stood center stage, microphone in hand, a surprised grin plastered on his face. He'd expected a laugh, a polite refusal, maybe a quick, "No thanks, I'm just a fan." He certainly hadn't expected the man to actually come up. "Well, all right now," Marty said, trying to sound jovial, even as a flicker of nervousness crossed his eyes. "Looks like we got a brave volunteer here." "Ben?" The guitarist lowered his head slightly, his eyes still fixed on the older man. The other bassiste stood straighter, her usual composed expression replaced by one of open curiosity. Sam, the drummer, stopped tapping his sticks and just stared wide-eyed. The man reached the stage floor and stood next to Marty, who was considerably shorter than him. Even with the pompadour, the air in the small club suddenly felt charged, expectant. The few patrons who had been chatting at the bar stopped mid-sentence, turning their heads. "So," Marty began, trying to break the sudden silence, "what's your name, partner?" He extended his hand. The man hesitated for a moment, then took Marty's hand. His grip was firm, warm, and surprisingly strong. "Just call me Al," he said, his voice low, a hint of something familiar in its timbre. Quick, simple alias, a last attempt at anonymity, even as he was stepping into the light. "Al, huh? Pleased to meet you, Al," Marty chirped, still looking a little bewildered. "So, Al, you said you used to sing a long time ago. What kind of stuff did you sing?" Al gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "A bit of everything, Marty. Blues, gospel, country, and a lot of rock and roll." "Sounds like you're right at home, then." Marty laughed, a nervous sound. He held out the microphone. "All right. Al, this here is Heartbreak Hotel. Think you can still hit those low, lonely notes for us?" Al looked at the microphone. It felt lighter than he remembered, yet infinitely heavier. His fingers tingled with the memory of gripping one feeling, the vibration of his own voice echoing through the speakers. He remembered the weight of expectation, the thrill of performance, the connection with thousands of faces. Now it was just a handful of people in a dingy club, but the feeling was no less profound. He took the microphone, his hand surprisingly steady, wrapped around the cool metal. He felt the familiar weight, the subtle balance. He brought it close to his lips, his dark glasses still hiding his eyes, making him seem both mysterious and intensely focused. Ben, the guitarist, had been watching his every move now, as Al held the microphone. Something clicked. The way he held it, the angle of his arm, the slight tilt of his head. It was so him, the true him. Ben felt a jolt of recognition, a shiver running down his spine. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible, but the feeling was undeniable. Leo and Sam, still mostly just curious, waited. Marty stood beside Al, ready to jump in if the volunteer faltered. "Whenever you're ready, Al," Marty said, giving the band a nod. Ben, still trying to process the strange feeling, strummed the melancholic opening chords of Heartbreak Hotel. Leo joined in with the mournful bassline, and Sam laid down a sparse, deliberate drum beat. The music was simple, raw, and steeped in a profound sadness. Al closed his eyes for a brief second, drawing a deep breath. The familiar notes filled the air around him, enveloping him, pulling him back through time. He felt the old memories rise, not painful now, but comforting. The loneliness, the raw emotion of the song, it was all there waiting for him. He opened his eyes, though his gaze remained hidden behind the dark lenses. The room was silent save for the mournful music. He leaned into the microphone, and then a voice rich and deep, tinged with a lifetime of experience, yet undeniably familiar, filled the velvet note. "Well, since my baby left me," the words were spoken, not sung, in the low, resonant tone that instantly commanded attention. It wasn't the voice of an impersonator trying to sound like someone else. It was a voice that belonged to history, to legend. Marty's jaw dropped, his eyes widened, fixing on Al. That voice. It wasn't just like Elvis. It was Elvis. The intonation, the phrasing, the subtle tremor of emotion. It was all there, unmistakable. Marty felt a wave of disbelief, then a cold surge of terror, then an overwhelming sense of awe. Ben's fingers froze on the fretboard. He stared, wide-eyed, at Al. His earlier suspicion had just been confirmed in a way that defied all logic and reason. His guitar slipped slightly in his grasp. Leo gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the man on stage. Sam dropped one of his drumsticks with a clatter that sounded deafening in the sudden, shocked silence. The small crowd in the club, who had been curious but mostly nonchalant, slowly began to realize what they were hearing. A few people exchanged bewildered looks. One woman at a table near the front dropped her beer mug. It shattered on the floor, but no one even flinched. Al continued, his voice rising, gaining strength, filling every corner of the room, not with force, but with an incredible, undeniable presence. "I found a new place to dwell. The note, the phrasing, the soul in those few words was something no impersonator could ever truly recutic. It was raw, real, and heartbreakingly beautiful." He was on the stage, the microphone in his hand, the music swirling around him. He had stepped into the light, and the shockwaves were just beginning. Profound silence that followed Al's opening lines was heavier than any applause. It was the silence of absolute disbelief, of minds trying to reconcile the impossible. Marty, still frozen beside him, looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Ben, Leo, and Sam were equally stunned, their instruments momentarily forgotten. Al, however, seemed oblivious to the growing shock around him. He had closed his eyes again, letting the music flow through him, becoming one with the raw emotion of Heartbreak Hotel. He held the microphone with a natural ease that bespoke years of practice, not casual amateur singing. Then he began to sing the chorus, and the full, undeniable power of his voice resonated through the small, smoky club. "Well, it's the Heartbreak Hotel." The voice was pure, rich, filled with a deep, resonant quality that sent shivers down spines. It wasn't just a perfect imitation. It was the original. The slight rasp, the powerful vibrato, the unmistakable phrasing. It was all there, resurrected from memory and legend. Marty stumbled backward a step, almost tripping over a cable. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't just a good singer. This was impossible. He looked at Ben, who was staring fixedly at Al, his mouth slightly agape. Leo had tears welling in her eyes, her hands still clapped over her mouth. Sam had picked up his dropped drumstick, but his hand was trembling too much to hold it steady. The few people in the audience were now on their feet, murmuring, whispering, pointing. Some were fumbling for their phones, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Al opened his eyes, and through the dark lenses he seemed to look directly at Marty. There was a warmth there, an invitation. Marty, still reeling, knew he had a choice. He could falter, let the band collapse in shock, or he could play. Despite his trembling hands, Ben somehow managed to keep playing the guitar riff, his fingers automatically finding the chords, though his mind was racing a mile a minute. Leo, wiping away a tear, instinctively joined back in on the bass, her fingers dancing over the strings, finding the familiar rhythm. Sam, shaking his head slightly, brought his stick down on the snare, a crisp, sharp beat. The band, against all odds, managed to fall back into step, albeit tentatively. It was as if their bodies were operating independently of their stunned minds, guided by muscle memory and an ingrained love for the music. They were playing with the real thing, and their instruments almost magically seemed to come alive in response. Al's voice soared, effortlessly hitting every note, every nuanced inflection. He moved slightly, a gentle sway of his hips, a subtle shift of his weight that was so utterly familiar, so utterly Elvis. He wasn't performing for fame or for money or even for attention. He was performing because the music was alive in him, because it had to come out. "You make me so lonely, baby." His voice held a tender vulnerability, a genuine sorrow that reached into the hearts of everyone listening. It was raw, honest, and profoundly moving. Marty, finally snapping out of his stupor, watched him, tears suddenly stinging his own eyes. He had spent years trying to capture a fraction of this magic, trying to embody a legend, and now the legend stood beside him, singing his own song with a humility and power that transcended everything Marty had ever known. He instinctively reached for his own microphone, bringing it up, not to sing, but to harmonize, to offer backup. His voice, usually a rough imitation, blended surprisingly well with Al's deeper tones, creating a tapestry of sound that was both familiar and utterly new. It was a perfect blend of tribute and original of fan and master. The crowd erupted. A gasp, then a few cheers, then a roar of applause and shouts. People were rushing forward, pushing closer to the stage, desperate to see, to hear, to believe. Fonts were held aloft, recording, streaming, trying to capture this impossible moment. Al seemed to swell with the music, his movements becoming more fluid, more confident. He wasn't doing the exaggerated gyrations of an impersonator. He was moving with the natural rhythm of a man born to the stage. He ran a hand through his silver pompadour, a gesture that was so undeniably him. Ben, now fully immersed, played with a renewed intensity, his guitar singing under his fingers. Leo's bass line pulsed with a deep groove. Sam, smiling through his shock, laid down a powerful beat, his drumming sharper and more precise than ever. They were no longer just a cover band, they were the backing band for a miracle. The song built to its crescendo, Al's voice ringing out powerful and clear. He was no longer Al, he was simply, undeniably, the king. And as the final mournful note hung in the air before fading into a wave of profound applause, the room was filled with the tangible energy of a legend returned. The final note of Heartbreak Hotel lingered in the air, a phantom echo of a dream. Then the silence was shattered by an explosion of sound. Collective gasps from the audience turned into a deafening roar. Cheers, shouts, screams of disbelief, and pure elation filled the velvet note. People surged forward, pressing against the stage, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and raw emotion. Al stood center stage, bathed in the slightly burnt-out spotlight, the microphone still in his hand. He looked out at the sea of faces, his expression hidden behind the dark glasses. Could feel the energy emanating from the crowd, the palpable shock and the dawning realization. Marty, still pale, stood a few feet away, utterly speechless. He watched Al, his mind reeling, the voice, the movements, the presence. There was no doubt it was him, the king, standing right there in the velvet note on a Tuesday night. Ben, Leo, and Sam were equally stunned. Ben had dropped his guitar pick. Leo was openly weeping, and Sam had slumped onto his drum stool, his mouth hanging open. They had gone from playing for a handful of regulars to backing a living legend, all in the space of one song. A woman in the front row, tears streaming down her face, pointed a trembling finger at Al. "It's him," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's really him, Elvis." The name shouted aloud seemed to electrify the room. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, escalating into excited shouts. "Elvis? No way! It can't be. Look at him. It is him." Al slowly raised the microphone to his lips again. Crowd instantly hushed, leaning forward, every eye fixed on him. "Well now," he said, his voice calmer than anyone expected, a familiar drawl softening the words. "It's been a mighty long time, hasn't it?" A collective gasp swept through the room. The voice, the accent, the simple, heartfelt honesty of the statement. It was the final, undeniable confirmation. It was Elvis. He slowly, deliberately reached up and took off his dark glasses. His eyes, the legendary blue eyes that had captivated millions, were clear and bright, full of a quiet wisdom and a touch of something else. A deep, almost shy vulnerability. The crowd roared again, louder this time. Tears flowed freely among the women, and even some of the men were openly weeping. A few people fainted from the sheer shock. Others simply stood frozen, trying to absorb the impossible reality before them. Al smiled a soft, genuine smile that held a touch of the old charm, but also a new, profound peace. "My name's Elvis, and it's good to be back among friends." The roar that followed was deafening, a tidal wave of pure emotion. People were screaming his name, cheering, clapping, some trying to push their way through the crush to get closer. It was pandemonium, but a joyful, reverent pandemonium. He turned to Marty, who was now trembling visibly. Marty's eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and awe. "Marty," Elvis said softly, extending a hand to his impersonator. "Thank you for the invitation, son. You've got a good band here." Marty, barely able to speak, just nodded, tears streaming down his face. He gripped Elvis's outstretched hand, his own trembling fingers barely able to hold on. "And you folks," he said, Leo and Sam in his voice. "You play with heart. That's what truly matters." Ben, still in shock, managed a weak smile, a silent nod. Leo wiped her eyes, a look of profound reverence on her face. Sam, finally finding his voice, choked out, "Mr. Presley, it's an honor. Just Elvis, son," Elvis said, his smile widening. "Just Elvis." He turned back to the crowd, who were still shouting, still cheering, still trying to process the miracle unfolding before them. "Now I hear you folks like to rock and roll," he said, his voice gaining a familiar playful cadence. "And I gotta say, after all these years, I still do too." He nodded to the band. A silent cue. Ben, feeling an electric surge of adrenaline, grabbed his pick. Leo straightened up her bass at the ready. Sam, his shock giving way to exhilaration, pounded his sticks together. Marty, tears still blurring his vision, managed to pull himself together. He looked at the real king standing beside him, the legend he had dedicated his life to honoring. And in that moment, all ego, all pretense, all doubt melted away. There was only reverence and a profound, humbling joy. Elvis gave the crowd one last captivating gaze, then a familiar, mischievous glint appeared in his blue eyes. He moved effortlessly into the opening notes of Hound Dog, and the sound, the energy, the pure, unadulterated magic that filled the velvet note that night was something no one present would ever, for the rest of their lives, forget. The king was back, and he was singing with his impersonators. The rest of the night was a blur, a whirlwind of music, tears, and absolute pandemonium. Elvis sang song after song, sometimes with Marty joining him, sometimes on his own. The band, the Memphis Cats, transformed into a living, breathing part of history. The crowd swelled as word spread like wildfire through the streets of Memphis. Soon the velvet note was bursting at the seams, people spilling out onto the sidewalk, craning their necks, desperate to catch a glimpse of the legend. His voice, matured and richer still, held the power and soul that had defined a generation. His movements, though less frenetic than in his youth, were still unmistakably his. The hip sway, the mic stand lean, the subtle shift in weight that conveyed so much emotion. He wasn't trying to recapture his past. He was living in the present, finding joy in the music, simply sharing his gift. When the final chord of "Suspicious Minds" rang out, Elvis bowed, a genuine, heartfelt gesture of gratitude. The applause was deafening, a roar that shook the very foundations of the old club. People were crying, cheering, screaming his name, trying to reach out and touch him. He raised a hand for silence, and slowly the noise subsided, replaced by a reverent hush. Thank you very much," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "It's been a long time since I felt a stage beneath my feet like this, and I gotta say it feels mighty good to be home." He looked around at the stunned, ecstatic faces of the crowd. "And I want to thank these fine musicians," he continued, gesturing to Marty, Ben, Leo, and Sam. "They kept the music alive when I was away. They played with heart, and that's the most important thing." He gave them a warm, appreciative smile. Marty, still numb with shock, could only nod, tears still welling in his eyes. Ben and Leo stood frozen, almost unable to believe this was real. Sam, the youngest, looked ready to burst with excitement. After a final wave, Elvis was quickly escorted off stage, disappearing into a small back room. Club remained buzzing, people talking excitedly, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Minutes later, Marty, Ben, Leo, and Sam were ushered into the same cramped, dimly lit back room. Elvis was sitting on a worn couch, looking remarkably calm considering the chaos he had just unleashed. He had taken off his jacket, and the silver in his hair caught the faint glow of a bare light bulb. "Come on in, folks," he said, a gentle smile on his face. "Don't just stand there." They shuffled in, looking like shy children meeting their idol. They stood awkwardly, unsure what to say. "Please, sit," Elvis urged, gesturing to a few folding chairs. They sat perched on the edge of the seats, still processing. Marty cleared his throat. "Mr. Presley, I don't even know what to say. We can't believe this is real." Elvis chuckled, a soft, familiar sound. "Believe me, son, sometimes I can't either." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. I needed to step away for a while, find some peace, live a normal life for a change." Leo, the bassist, finally found her voice. "But why now? Why here? Why us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Elvis looked at her, his eyes kind. "I was just passing through. Saw your sign. Heard you playing. And something just pulled me in. I saw the dedication in your eyes, the love for the music. It reminded me of why I started in the first place. And Marty, you got a good spirit, you really do. You embody the energy, the joy of it. That's not easy to do." Marty flushed, overwhelmed by the compliment. I just try to do justice to the king, sir, to keep your legacy alive. And you do, son, you absolutely do," Elvis said warmly. "You all do. Hearing you play tonight, it felt like coming home in a way I hadn't expected. It brought something back in me I thought was long gone." Ben, the guitarist, finally spoke, his voice quiet. "You really played with us like we were just a regular band." "You are a regular band, son," Elvis corrected gently. "And you're a good one. You caught on quick. That's the sign of true musicians." He paused, a hint of sadness in his voice. For so long, the music was a job, a performance, a responsibility. Tonight, it was just music, and that was a gift. "Sam," the drummer suddenly blurted out, "are you going to keep singing, Mr. Presley? Are you going to record again?" Elvis smiled, a contemplative look on his face. "I don't know, son. One night at a time, I suppose, but tonight was special, and it was all because of you folks." He leaned forward, his gaze direct and sincere. "Thank you. Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to just sing, for the pure love of it. Thank you for keeping the spirit alive." The room was silent again, but this time it was a silence filled with profound emotion. The impersonators who had dedicated their lives to honoring a legend were now face to face with that legend. Being thanked for their passion, it was a moment that transcended fame, money, or history. It was a shared, heartwarming connection through the universal language of music. The initial shock and awe began to mellow into a profound sense of shared wonder. Marty, Ben, Leo, and Sam, still somewhat awestruck, found themselves relaxing slightly in Elvis's presence. He was just Al again, albeit an owl, with a voice that had captivated millions. He listened intently as they talked, asking about their lives, their day jobs, how they got into music, and what Elvis's music meant to them. Marty, finally finding his footing, explained how he started impersonating. "I always loved your music, Mr. Presley. My grandpappy used to play your records, and I don't know, I guess I wanted to feel that magic, even if it was just a shadow of it." Elvis nodded slowly. "That's how it always starts, son. A feeling, a connection." Ben talked about learning guitar by ear, trying to figure out Scotty Moore's riffs note for note. It was like trying to crack a code. You know your music. It just has this way of getting under your skin. It's simple, but it's got depth. Leo spoke about being drawn to the raw emotion in his ballads, how they resonated with her own experiences. "It's not just catchy tunes, Elvis. There's real soul in there, real heartache, real joy." Sam, the youngest, just gushed. "I grew up listening to your songs, sir. My dad's a huge fan. I never thought I'd ever even be in the same room, let alone play drums for you." Elvis listened patiently, a faint smile on his face. "It's humbling," he said softly, "to hear what the music meant to folks. You know, when you're in the thick of it. The tours, the movies, the pressure, sometimes you lose sight of what it was all for. It just becomes a machine." He sighed. "Tonight reminded me." He paused, then looked at them, his blue eyes twinkling. "You know, for a bunch of folks who never played together before, we sounded pretty good out there, didn't we?" Marty grinned, a genuine, unburdened grin. "You made us sound good, sir. We were just trying to keep up." "Nonsense," Elvis chuckled. "You were more than keeping up. You were right there with me. That's what a band is all about. Feeling each other, anticipating, reacting. It's a conversation, you see." He leaned forward, his voice taking on a more serious yet gentle tone. "It's easy to get caught up in the glitz, the fame, the money, but the true heart of it, the thing that makes it last, that's the music itself, and the connection you make with the people who listen. You folks understood that. You understood the soul of the music." He looked from one band member to the next. "You're not just impersonators, Marty. You're interpreters. You're keeping the spirit alive, and that's a special thing." He then stood up, stretching slightly. "You know," he said, a playful glint in his eye, "I haven't had a proper jam session in, well, a very, very long time. No pressure, no cameras, just pure music." He gestured towards their instruments. "How about it? One more for the road, just for us?" Marty's eyes lit up. "And yes, I'm serious. What do you say, boys and girl? One more song, just for fun." Ben, Leo, and Sam didn't need to be asked twice. They practically leaped out of their chairs, scrambling back to their instruments. Marty grabbed his guitar, his heart pounding with excitement. "What do you want to play, Elvis?" Marty asked, still a little hesitant with the name. Elvis thought for a moment, a thoughtful smile on his face. "How about something with a little less pressure? Something that just feels good." He looked at Ben. "You know, that's all right, Mama?" Ben's eyes widened. "Are you kidding?" "Of course. That was the very first song, the one that started it all." Elvis took a deep breath, picking up Marty's spare microphone. He didn't wear his dark glasses now, his blue eyes shining with excitement. "All right then," he said, a familiar spark igniting within him. "Let's play some music." Ben started the iconic opening riff, raw and bluesy. Leo joined in with the walking bass line, simple yet incredibly groovy. Sam laid down a steady, infectious rhythm. And then Elvis, standing center stage in the small back room, began to sing. "Well, that's all right, Mama. That's all right for you." His voice was pure, unadulterated rock and roll, filled with the joy of creation. Closed his eyes, swaying with the rhythm, completely lost in the moment. Marty, instead of trying to be Elvis, just watched, captivated, occasionally strumming along, his own voice joining in on backup harmonies. It wasn't a performance for a crowd. It was a pure, unscripted jam session among musicians who shared a deep love for the same music. And in that moment, the years, the legends, the fame, it all melted away. There was just the music, the shared dream, and the heartwarming connection between a king and his devoted followers, playing together simply for the love of it. The impromptu jam session in the back room of the Velvet Note was magical. They played for nearly an hour, moving from "That's All Right, Mama" to "Mystery Train," then a soulful rendition of "Always on My Mind," where Elvis's voice brought tears to their eyes, and finally, a raucous, long, tall Sally. It was pure, unadulterated joy, music for music's sake, unburdened by expectation or the glare of the spotlight. Elvis was clearly enjoying himself, a genuine smile rarely leaving his face. He shared stories from his early days, talked about the nuances of a song, and even offered a few pointers on how to get a particular sound or phrase just right. He wasn't just a legend, he was a mentor, a fellow musician sharing his passion. Finally, as the last notes of Long Tall Sally faded, a comfortable silence settled over the room. Everyone was breathless, exhilarated. "Man," Marty sighed, shaking his head. That was incredible. "Best rehearsal we've ever had," Elvis chuckled. "More than a rehearsal, son. That was pure music." He looked around at them, his eyes warm. "You know, seeing you folks, hearing you play my songs with such heart, it means more than you can imagine. It's like a piece of me, still out there, alive and well." Ben, the guitarist, asked hesitantly, "What happens now, Elvis? Will you be staying? Will you sing again?" Elvis leaned back on the couch, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I don't know what the future holds, Ben. I found my peace, and that's precious to me. But tonight showed me that maybe, just maybe, there's still a place for me to share this gift in my own way, on my own terms. No big tours, no movie deals, just music when it feels right." He stood up, signaling the end of their private session. Marty's heart sank slightly, knowing this incredible night was drawing to a close. Just then a voice called from outside the door. "Elvis, they're still out there, the crowd. They're not leaving. They want an encore." It was the club manager, his face flushed with excitement and stress. Elvis glanced at the door, then back at the band. A flicker of the old charisma, the performer's instinct sparked in his eyes. "Well now," he said, a familiar mischievous glint returning. "What do you say, boys and girl? Shall we give 'em one more for the road?" Marty's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? You'd play with us again?" "Only if you're up for it," Elvis replied. A knowing smile. "We started something tonight. Seems only right. We finish it together." The band members didn't hesitate. They were beyond tired, beyond shocked, beyond words. But the chance to play with Elvis Presley again for a crowd that knew it was him, this time, was an opportunity they wouldn't miss for anything. They walked back onto the stage, Marty still in his rhinestone jumpsuit, the band behind him. The crowd erupted, a deafening roar of recognition and pure joy. Flashbulbs, popped phone screens lit up the room. But this time it wasn't about the initial shock, it was about celebration. Elvis stepped to the mic, a simple, heartfelt smile on his face. He didn't need an introduction, the crowd already knew. "Good evening, Memphis," he boomed, his voice strong and clear. "Thank you for welcoming me home tonight, and I want to dedicate this next one, this last one, to these fine musicians. Right here, the Memphis Cats, who reminded me what pure music is all about. He gestured to Marty and the band, who beamed with pride. Then, with a nod to Ben, he launched into the iconic opening of An American Tria. It was a powerful, emotional choice, a song that merged three classic melodies symbolizing unity and hope. As Elvis sang, his voice soaring, filled with a renewed passion and a deep, profound gratitude, Marty stood beside him, no longer an impersonator but a fellow musician, a companion in this shared dream. He joined in on the harmonies, his voice blending perfectly with the King's, a tribute to the legacy he loved. Ben, Leo, and Sam played with a precision and feeling they hadn't known they possessed their instruments, singing under their hands. The crowd was swept away, many openly weeping, overcome by the sheer beauty and significance of the moment. It was more than just a concert. It was a spiritual experience, a bridge between past and present, a testament to the enduring power of music and human connection. As the final majestic notes of An American Trio faded, Elvis took a deep bow, then embraced Marty, a gesture of profound respect and camaraderie. He waved to the crowd, a final warm smile gracing his lips, and then, as quickly as he had appeared, he exited the stage, leaving behind a night that would be etched into the collective memory of Memphis. He didn't make any grand announcements about a comeback tour or new albums. He simply disappeared back into the quiet life he had cultivated, but with a renewed sense of purpose and a lighter heart. The Al he had been was still there, but now a vital part of Elvis had been reawakened, connected to the people and the music he loved. The Memphis Cats continued to play at the Velvet Note, but their lives were forever changed. Their small club gigs became legendary, often packed with curious fans hoping for another miracle. Marty, Ben, Leo, and Sam played with a new confidence, a deeper understanding of the music, and the knowledge that they had once stood shoulder to shoulder with the King. They continued to honor his legacy, but now it was a legacy touched by friendship, a shared dream that had come true on a Tuesday night in Memphis, changing everything and heartwarming everyone who had the privilege to witness it.